Good evening. We're going to break the usual habit of starting late and try and start on time because this is a 90-minute documentary and the chit-chat will follow that. I'm Dominic Fulder. I'm a Vice President of the FCCT this year. For those of you who aren't regulars, we do these big programs in the middle of the week, usually on Wednesdays. Today's a Thursday. And we charge an entry fee if you're not a member. If you like the club and you come often enough, it's well worth joining as a member. So I urge you to do so. We have coming up a program tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. Rising Authoritarianism and the Retreat of Aid, Confronting U.S. Aid Cuts and Techno-Colonialism in the Global Majority. So come along tomorrow and find out what that actually means. Then we have on the 15th of May at 9:30 a.m. Idaho Hotbit 2025, moving forward with the power of communities. That's a press conference. In the evening at 7 p.m., this is Thursday the 15th, we have an outside panel taking a look at the progress on the charge of genocide that has been brought against Israel at the International IJC International Court in The Hague. And we'll have the South African ambassador who's leading the coalition. South Africa is leading the coalition of countries on that project. He will be in the club to talk to you. Right, then we have a very important program on the 16th. It's a lunchtime program, and it's Policies and Patterns, State-Abetted Transnational Crime in Cambodia as a Global Security Threat. This is the launch of a report looking at Cambodia as basically an international kleptocracy. And the interesting thing about this particular panel is that it actually attempts to put a value on transnational crime, that's scamming and online gambling, as a proportion of Cambodian GDP. They have come up with a figure of 40%. That's going to be interesting, but I think this is a very newsworthy event if you want to attend. And so to this evening, Dateline Saigon, a film that concentrates very much from the American perspective on coverage of the Vietnam War and the battle basically between a very powerful print media at that time and the government on the way that the war was presented. This was a hinge in international press history, a very important point, and nothing was ever quite the same again. We'll come back to this later, but before we launch the documentary, I'm going to show you a trailer from Frontline, which is a film about the life of Neil Davis, just to remind everybody of the strong connection between this club and the coverage of the Vietnam War. Many veterans of the Vietnam War ended up in Bangkok, and to show you that it wasn't only Americans that were covering it. So this relates directly to the fall of Saigon. Thumb, can you play it, please? Can I have some volume? Thanks. So that was the fall of Saigon, 30th of April, 1975. Neil Davis filmed it and was actually more famous, I think, probably for his coverage of Cambodia. He was the president of the FCCT in 1981, and he was killed in an attempted coup on 9th of September 1985, so this is going to be the 40th anniversary of that. And there was always tremendous grief in the club that he died in a trivial Thai coup, basically a farce that petered out within 2 hours, and that this great correspondent was lost. The documentary you're about to see will take you 10 years back to the early 60s, JFK, and how the journalist community suddenly began to realize they were being lied to, that the American public was being lied to, and the dilemma they faced about not playing with the team and going along with the US military. So this is a very interesting documentary. Thank you, Tom. We're just about to be joined by Thomas D. Herman, who's the director. He's joining us from Boston remotely. It's 11 hours behind us. And whilst that's coming up, you'll see that there was only one of the 5 journalists in the documentary who's still alive, and that's Peter Arnett, who was invited to join us this evening, and he sends his apologies. He's now 90 and he doesn't leave home. So everything's a bit difficult. Peter Arnett is a particular interest in that group to this club because he actually cut his teeth as a journalist at the Bangkok World before he got involved with Vietnam. So that he was at the Bangkok World, which at that time was the second English language daily in Bangkok. And that was founded by a man called Darrell Berrigan, who was a president of the FCCT in the early 60s. I think he was with the New York Times. And he was murdered in 1965 under a situation I don't need to go into at this moment. But what came out in that documentary was quite interesting about Time magazine having this extraordinary propaganda agenda in this part of the world, and that was led by the publisher, who was a man called James A. Linen, who actually became a shareholder in the Bangkok World. So there was a very interesting inside story going on there. Anyway, I digress. Tom, we've lost you. You were there a second ago. He's back.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
us? We can hear you.
I can hear you.
Great. Well, that was a wonderful documentary, beautifully crafted. I don't think it put a foot wrong at any point.
Yeah.
But
You're very kind. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm buttering you up. So can you...
Yeah. It's a tough audience there.
Can you tell us how it came to be? Just give us a thumb sketch of what happened.
Sure. Let me just say thank you, Dominic, and the members of the FCC Thailand for inviting me to screen this film. It's an honor to be here, even if I'm several thousand miles away here in Boston, Massachusetts. I had long been an admirer of David Halberstam and the book that was just referenced, The Best and the Brightest. And, I'd always been curious about the controversy. Hopefully that controversy is simmered down, although with the current administration here in the United States, maybe it's being jacked up a bit. But the controversy surrounding the reporting of Vietnam, was it fair? Some accuse the reporters, as I'm sure many in the audience know, of being responsible for the Americans losing the war. I wanted to revisit that at the remove of a number of decades with fresh eyes. I happened to be in Vietnam for a number of weeks as a field producer during, it's hard to believe, the 25th anniversary of the end of the war. I met a number of reporters who were back, who had covered the war, who were back for a reunion, and a number of others who were still working. Started talking to them, and it became clear to me that I wanted to capture their stories before it was too late. The film was not originally going to be focused on the 5 reporters that you just saw in the film: David Halberstam, Peter Arnett, Neil Sheehan, Horst Faas, and Malcolm Browne. I initially just went out and interviewed as many as I could get a hold of. and I ended up doing well over 60 taped interviews. But the story you've just seen was especially compelling and stood out among many other very good stories I could have put into this film, but you only have 90 minutes, so it's difficult to fit everything into this box. Why was this fresh, this story that you've just seen? Well, these five were among the first to be critical of the American effort. They all went over, as the film revealed, as very young men on their first or second overseas assignment. They went in to Vietnam carrying Cold War baggage, as you've just seen, and it took them some period of time to overcome their preconceptions. And that, to me, gave another element to the story. It wasn't just about the reporting, but it was really a transformation of each of these five, crisis of conscience, if you will, but their characters evolved from the way we see them at the beginning until the end of the film. And that gave it a characterization and an emotional punch that I wanted to have. I didn't want this just to be an historical recount of a bunch of stories and reporters. Why don't I stop with that? I hope, Dominic, that began to answer your question as I ramble on a little bit.
Yes, well, it finishes with this very interesting Annie Leibovitz picture of the five. When was that taken, and what were the circumstances? Because that's presumably well ahead of when the film was finished.
Yes. Annie's photograph was taken at a famous and unfortunately now gone Upper East Side New York restaurant called Elaine's, which was a hangout for journalists and people from the arts world, politicians, and so on. And it was taken in the late 1990s, and it really encapsulates what happened to these five young men who went over as competitors. And all of you in the audience who are journalists know it's a very competitive field. So they went over as competitors, but in the circumstances they were thrown into, they had to protect each other, and they became lifelong friends, godparents to other of these brothers' sons and daughters. And what each of them, to a person, told me is both their experience in Vietnam was the most important, and what each of them went on to have very celebrated professional lives, but that the crucible of Vietnam brought them together as lifelong friends.
Right, we have a microphone at the back of the room, and it would be very nice if other people ask questions, particularly Keith Richburg, former president.
Oh, great.
He's here. The former
hi,
president
Keith.
of the Hong Kong Club, who's actually responsible for connecting us anyway. So
Well, let me
Keith,
just say that Keith invited me to screen the film in early 2020 in Hong Kong, and we've made arrangements to go over there, thanks to Keith. And I got an email from him, I think it was in January, and he said, "Tom, there's some kind of flu going on over here. We may have to postpone your trip for a few weeks." Well, something more than a little bit of a flu occurred, and the trip never happened. Hi, Keith.
and that's how you ended up at the FCCT in 2025.
Yes.
There's a wonderful line in this thing. It's from Peter Arnett, and he talks about the last great wire service battle, the last great print battle. Do you think that still holds true?
No. I don't think so, as I said. And as you and the audience know, journalism is very competitive. There are other platforms of reporting beyond just the wire services, the prints, and the nascent television networks that Peter and the others were supplying with information now 60 years plus ago. So I don't think that's entirely true.
Okay, but it's a period, it's a triumph for what we would now call the legacy media. You know,
Yeah.
the print media, the power of television, which is not the same today. I mean, CNN is always talked about, but people forget not many people actually watch it, you know, by comparison. It's not like Cronkite being the voice of God and making pronouncements. The world's changed. We've now got to a point where we have an urgent need to speak truth to power, particularly in the US. How do you think that translates into the modern world?
I think that David Halberstam's coda at the end of the film is as relevant, indeed even more relevant today than when David spoke those words to me, given the unprecedented assaults on the media, both figuratively and literally. Every generation has to fight for freedom of information, for an independent media holding the powerful to account. We saw it with John Kennedy, and we can go back to Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War. We can go back to Woodrow Wilson in this country in the First World War, and there's certainly other examples elsewhere around the world. But what's going on today, particularly in this country, but we can cite other countries, whether it's Turkey or Hungary, the fight continues. It's evergreen. Every generation has to struggle to protect it. But what, I don't mean to get political here, but I will. What is going on in this country is taken attacks on the media to a new level. And it's not just in this country. I've just finished, just last week actually, finished a film, a short documentary called Calling, which focuses, highlights how it is more dangerous, both physically and otherwise, to be a journalist today than ever. And I'm not limiting that comment to what's going on in Gaza, but it is in this country, it is in Russia, and in so many other places. And while you, Dominic, and the audience listening to me prattle on understand this, what I have learned, and one of the reasons I made this film, is that it's not widely understood how much more dangerous it is today to be a journalist than ever before. Journalists are targeted now. They were not targeted, generally, during the Vietnam era. Yes, some were in an unfortunate few weeks in Cambodia, but never like today.
Well, yeah, but Madame Nu had the assassination list, and Sheehan actually talks about how frightening it was to know that that thing existed.
Yeah.
So it's not unheard of. Keith.
Hi, Tom. This is Keith Richburg. Good to see you.
Hello, Keith. How nice to hear your voice and see you.
Yeah, we still haven't been able to meet because of that little flu that was going around when I was supposed to bring you out to Hong Kong. And I should tell the audience here, you were so generous, you allowed me to show the film to my students when I was teaching in Hong Kong, because I thought it was so important for young journalism students to see that film because of the way the Vietnam War really changed reporting and changed journalism and made journalists more cynical and more disbelieving of official sources. But just for a question, maybe just might be interesting to talk about, I think the Vietnam War also changed the military and the way the military deals with journalists. You know, I was in Iraq, I was in Afghanistan as a reporter, as a correspondent, and you could no longer just kind of wander around the field and just talk to soldiers, talk to Marines the way those reporters could. You no longer can get photographs of, bodies coming back at Andrews Air Force Base or the base in Delaware. So, I mean, how did the experience, do you think, of the journalism in Vietnam change the way the military deals with reporters?
It changed it, Keith, in a major way. As Morley Safer, I think it was Morley who pointed out that young information officers are taught today, were taught then, Vietnam is precisely how it should not be handled. After Vietnam, journalists, the first really major military engagement after Vietnam was during the Reagan administration when we invaded the superpower of Grenada, okay? Journalists were totally shut out, weren't allowed to go to Grenada. A group of, in the aftermath of that, a group of prominent journalists led by Walter Cronkite met with Pentagon officials and crafted new rules, which largely resulted in what we today call embedding, which is certainly valuable, but it isn't, at least when there's an American-led or controlled engagement, it doesn't lead to free reporting. At the end of the film, we see Peter in Baghdad. Peter and I and my crew went to Baghdad for a week to film that, and we had to check in the green zone with the press folks and agree to a whole list of reasons or rules that we couldn't break, or they would pull our credentials and escort us out of the country. One of those rules was no quotations that aren't attributed, nothing anonymous. Halberstam's quote to me was, look, if we have to quote a general by name being critical of the Pentagon, by the next morning he'll no longer be a general. So it's kind of a backdoor censorship. But in short, Keith, it's a very good question, and it's much more restrictive today.
Right, we have a veteran correspondent from the Vietnam War, Lance Woodruff, who was in Vietnam from 1966 to 8, covered the Tet Offensive. He was with the U.S. National Council of Churches, and what distinguishes Lance in many ways is he was not a frontline combat photographer, but he was photographing the Vietnam behind the scene, the human side of it. So we've got him here. He's a spry 82. Two things, Lance, because you've just come back from Saigon. First thing is, what's your reaction to the film, to what you've just seen? Does it come all flooding back or what?
It totally blows me away, and I know a great deal about.
Close to the mic.
It does totally blow me away, but I'm not blown away easily. I was 23 when I was recruited to go to Vietnam by the National Council of Churches. I got to Vietnam and American soldiers and officials saying, why do the churches need somebody here? Don't we have enough real journalists? I am a journalist. I was a journalist. I want to tell you two things. 9 days ago, on what the Vietnamese government calls reunification. And I was not there in 1975. I was in Bangkok and working for the UN at that time, and Vietnamese friends were coming to me asking for help to get their families out. Nobody had information. Well, on April 30th this year, I sat in the grandstands watching troops from all kinds of military groups from Vietnam, but troops from Cambodia, Laos, China, other countries. I sat behind a group of diplomats, African diplomats. I said, "Where are you from?" to a gentleman in front of me. He said he was from Tanzania. Well, in 1963, in June 1963, this film helps me tie pieces together. In June 1963, I was in Dar es Salaam, Tanganyika, and doing an undergraduate research project for my university, for my college. African Askaris, veterans of the German army in World War I, came to me. They were still on government pension, German government pension, a government that can do Southwest Africa genocide, yet these African soldiers could be immensely loyal to von Lettow-Vorbeck and their German officers. Well, the African soldiers, the African veterans, asked me, what are you Americans doing in Vietnam? 1963, in Tanganyika. I didn't know Americans were in Vietnam. I've been following Vietnam since April 1954, when my first male teacher, who was a Korean War veteran, brought a radio into my classroom in Salem, Ohio. He puts on the radio, and we listen to the broadcasts about how civilization as we know it will disappear if the Viets are successful against heroic France. I first went to Dien Bien Phu only 7 years ago. I took my sons in 1989. I tried to go to Vietnam, to Dien Bien Phu. We only got as far as Hoa Binh. Okay, vignette. I say vignette, but these are like pebbles in a pond, all the memories that can come. Last month, 2 months ago, at Kruk University here in Bangkok, I was invited to a seminar of university rectors from Thailand and from Russia. I received an email on a Saturday afternoon to show up on Monday, and I did. And so I was invited into the inner circle and met 5 university rectors from Moscow and 3 from St. Petersburg. One in particular from the humanities faculty in Moscow was asked me, what do you think? I'd like to talk with you about Graham Greene. He said, have you read The Quiet American? Well, yes, it was the first thing I read when I got to Saigon in 1966. at age 23. I didn't know, I'm a political liberal. I was a Humphrey Democrat in Minnesota, where I went to school. I read The Quiet American, and I didn't know that the US government had decided that was an anti-American book, and that Graham Greene was forbidden entry into the United States. Anyway,
Thank
the
you.
theme goes on.
Well, let me just say, Lance, thank you very much for your kind words about the film. You were there in the 60s. I was not. So coming from you, it's very important. Let me also add that I am a member of a group, a listserv, a group called Vietnam Old Hats, and Lance not infrequently posts very interesting comments on that list. So it's nice to see you almost in person, Lance.
Your Tom, the film won multiple accolades and awards. What was the reception, and did it change anything that you perceived anyway?
Did the fact that it won awards change anything? Well, it certainly was very gratifying. And look, I give most of the credit for the awards to the main characters in this film. What I set out to do was to let them tell their story without trying to influence the story editorially. It was quite clear how they felt. I hope it was to you as viewers, but did it? I don't think it changed how I felt about the film, other than I was delighted that it was recognized and is continued to be of interest both in universities in this country, for important groups like the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand and Hong Kong. I find that I'm asked to screen it and provide a lecture at a number of universities here in the United States several times a year, so that's good. Doesn't pay the rent, but there sometimes. So
how do you pay the rent?
Okay, I'm a practicing lawyer, and I only half joke that practicing law finances my bad habits like filmmaking. My law partners think I'm a little crazy. They're probably right, because I tend to, when I get involved in a project, I tend to disappear. In law firms, you have to keep track of your time, and usually when I'm in a project, my time sheets calculated about the bottom of the list at my firm.
Early on, we saw Malcolm Browne, one of the most talkative of your subjects. And of course, Malcolm took that extraordinary picture of the immolation of the monk in Saigon, which is arguably one of the 5 great images or resilient images of the Vietnam War that almost everybody recognizes. You've got the last helicopter from Saigon, miscaptioned. It never left the American embassy, but it went from nearby. And of course now we've got this very interesting controversy that's popped up about who took the picture of the napalm girl. And of course it was Horst Faas who was into it. And I'm not going to ask you something crass about what you think, because you almost certainly haven't seen the film, have you?
I haven't, and as far as I know, it still hasn't been released.
No, that's correct. I think they made an announcement today. But what's interesting is the fact that it's a re-examination of the way the war was covered and the use of Vietnamese journalists, and it's quite a passionate piece of work, and it deserves a lot of attention. Do you find it interesting that such a forensic analysis of something so long ago, I know it occurred in the 70s, so it's a bit beyond this period, of that war could be taking place today?
Well, yes, I don't want to comment on a film I haven't seen. And Nick Ut is a friend of mine. That doesn't mean that I will accept his word. Standing next to Nick, when Nick took that picture, was also a close friend, the photojournalist David Arnett, who was right there, right next to Nick. Why didn't David get that photo? Because he was changing film at the time that Kim Phuc ran by. So David has great photographs of her rear end, but not the photograph that was taken. David, I might say, insists that from what he saw and knows, it was Nick. But I won't. I don't really want to weigh in on that. Back to your question, do I find it interesting? Yes. I think it's a good thing to examine and re-examine as new eyes, fresh eyes, want to revisit an old subject. Whether this is the right one or not, I'll withhold comment till I see the film. But I think it's always helpful to re-examine in a responsible way matters that have been discussed for interpretation in current context.
Sure. Right, there's another question.
Hi, Phil Robertson. I'm a member of the FCCT board. Fantastic film, really superb. I wanted to ask you actually about one of the characters who appears in the film, who wasn't one of the five, who was Walter Cronkite, who of course was a pillar of American journalism for decades. And he says a few things in the film, but I was wondering whether you could share things that he might have said to you in addition off camera about these five journalists and what they went through.
Sure, Phil. Thanks for asking that question. Yeah, I spent an afternoon with Walter at his home on Martha's Vineyard here in Massachusetts. He was very, how shall I put it, complimentary and respectful of the work that these five journalists did. And he said a lot more. I wish I could have put more of Walter in the film, including his famous editorial in 1968, when essentially he said, it's time to end this war. Of course, the war went on for 7 years thereafter. So he was very complimentary of each of the five of them and respected the work that they did. And he said, in retrospect, he wished that he had paid more attention to them early on than he had. And he didn't really come to the conclusion that this war needs to stop and we need to get out until Tet in early 1968. He said we should have been listening more closely to these people. But again, Walter was working for an important legacy network. He came out of the World War II generation, and he didn't want to believe that what we were doing was not right. He bought into the domino theory, and it took him a while, longer than it took Neil Sheehan, for example, unfortunately, to come to the conclusion, once he was walking in the streets of Wei in January and February of 1968, it became clear to him that this was a mistake. Phil, I hope that answered your question.
So I think we should. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, just very briefly. I said I interviewed, 50, 60 people. Almost all of them had wonderful stories. It hasn't gone without citation that there are no women in this film. And I just couldn't fit them into this story. And I hope that I'll be able to do another film on very courageous women who are among the first to cover combat. Certainly, there were some, Maggie Higgins in Korea and in World War II, but the Frances Fitzgeralds, the Kate Webbs, the Gloria Emersons, and so forth gave me wonderful interviews. And one of the themes that I'll focus on is how when the women, not all of them, but a significant number of them went over to cover the war. They didn't want to cover the bang-bang so much, the combat, as much as they wanted to cover how the war impacted on the Vietnamese people.
Sorry, question? Just identify yourself.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me? Hi, Thomas. Love the movie. Really appreciate your work. My name is Sen. I'm a Vietnamese journalist working for the BBC. The film
Hello,
has been
Sen.
out for the film has been out for how long now? Since 2016, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. Have you ever shown it in Vietnam or to a larger Vietnamese audience? If so, what was the reaction? And I was wondering if you were an audience in a room that was showing a movie about Vietnamese frontline reporters at the time covering the war in their own country, what would you expect to see? Thank you.
Whoa, two very good and good questions. On your first question, have I shown it in Vietnam? No, not yet. I very much want to go to Vietnam and to show it there. I've discussed this possibility with the Fulbright University in Vietnam, and I hope something can be arranged because it ought to be screened in Vietnam. And I'm sorry, your second question was, if you repeat the second question, so I don't
Yes,
get
that's
it
fine.
wrong.
If you were an audience sitting in a room watching a movie, let's say a documentary, about Vietnamese frontline war reporters covering the war in their own country, what would be your expectation? What would you like to see?
Well, first of all, I'd love to see that film, and it ought to be made. You may well be familiar with a book, a photographic book called Requiem, which was compiled by Horst Faas and Tim Page, which is a tribute to, particularly to photographers on both sides or all sides of the war who died in the war. It would be a fascinating film, I think, and maybe someone is developing it now, to tell the stories of photographers on both sides. I think especially photographers from the North who really had a very difficult time in terms of getting food, in terms of getting film, getting down from the North, or sequestering themselves in the countryside. It was very difficult. I'd love to see that film. And Sen, if you're interested in making it, give me a shout.
So there's also a second book. You mentioned Requiem, but there's another one called The Other Vietnam, which was edited by Doug Niven, and that's exclusively pictures taken by the North Vietnamese field photographers who are often active combatants as well. And it's a marvelous book, wonderful pictures in it. It's time to wrap the evening because you're all past your bedtime. But in the film, your film, one of the things that comes up a couple of times is the domino theory. And of course, in a way, it was correct for Indochina because we had Saigon fall within 2 weeks of Phnom Penh falling. Two different events. For Phnom Penh, it was a disaster. Kicking off for the Vietnamese, the reunification was something that's just been celebrated on its 50th anniversary. But the thing that happened, bringing it back to Thailand, was that within 6 weeks of the fall of Saigon, Kukrit Pramot, the Prime Minister, had gone to Beijing to normalize relations or establish diplomatic relations with the Chinese. There had been diplomatic relations pre-communism, pre-1949, but this was the first time it happened with the communists. And at that time, all the states of Southeast Asia were busily running up to Beijing to go. They had foreseen the failure of the American adventure, and the proof that the domino theory didn't work was that Thailand did not fall. And the Thais at that point decided all the American forces were to be kicked out, closed down the air bases. And the rationale was quite simple. The American presence in South Vietnam had not protected them. It had not prevented the northern incursion. Therefore, there was no justification for the Americans to remain in Thailand. And one of the founding principles of ASEAN is that there are no foreign bases. It's been breached, but that is a founding principle. So there's a lot of legacy history there that's very interesting. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Tom, fantastic to see you. It's amazing what we can do. I think COVID has improved all this sort of activity online, and it means that we can bring you across the world and join us in a room in Bangkok. Wonderful film. I think everybody enjoyed it. We look forward to seeing the next one.
Well, thank you. It really has been a pleasure. I wish that I could be in the room with all of you in Bangkok today, and maybe with the next one. But thank you so much. The film is streaming on a number of platforms, not everywhere in the world, but we're trying to get it out both on free and on subscription platforms. And if you have any more thoughts or comments, I'd love to hear them. I'll try to respond to them. Dominic has my contact information. Feel free to give it out, Dominic. And once again, thank you so much for this very interesting discussion and for your fine questions. And Sen, if you want to make that film on the Vietnamese photographers, give me a shout. Thank you.
Yeah, and I sent a note this evening to Gary Knight about the screening of his film here in Bangkok, and tried to put a bit of a guilt trip on him. But there's really actually nowhere in the world that it would be more appropriate to screen it to an audience than Bangkok.
Do you know why it hasn't been distributed yet?
I think they're afraid of legal action.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's been hanging around, and I don't think that hasn't affected the production, but it's affected distributors' willingness to take it on.
I see.
My argument would be show it at the FCCT, because the idea that a news organisation would sue us is just so preposterous. It's not going to happen. And we could do anything. We can close the room. We can make it members only. We can fit in. We can ride bicycles around the room if they want. But, it would be good. It should be shown in Bangkok.
Yeah, it should be.
Good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.